So as we celebrate the holy days of December, today I really want to concentrate on the European tradition of Advent. Um, I come from a European heritage, and I think the majority of American culture is kind of built around European traditions. And so we're going to kind of look at some of these traditions that have come up around Christmas over this next month. But I've been talking about Advent. I introduced this idea of the reverse Advent calendar a couple of weeks ago. And so this week, though, I was asked to clarify, to explain exactly what Advent was and how does it pertain to science of mind. So let me begin my talk today with a little background, a historical background, a kind of a brief Reader's Digest version, if I may, to the season of Advent. So in the 5th century, there was an attempt to codify and create a structure to what is known as the church year and the church. And our leaders, the church leaders back in the 5th century, decided that the church year should begin, obviously, with the birth of Christ. The word Advent means joyful expectation. And so the season of Advent is about the joyful expectation of the birth of Christ. And it also then marks the beginning of what is known as the church year. In the Catholic Church and in some of the other mainline Protestant churches, such as the Lutheran Church and the Episcopal Church, pretty much all follow this church year as established in the 5th century. During that time, 4 qualities of the divine were selected to be featured during the month of Advent. Those were hope, love, joy, and peace. And if you think about it, those are words that we see a lot connected with Christmas. Love, joy, peace. And these come from this decision, a very conscious decision that was made to create a tradition, I guess I should say. Now, back in the 5th century, it was mostly monks and priests who were celebrating the season of Advent. It was certainly not a widespread idea as it is today, certainly not commercialized as it is today. They spent 30 days fasting and in days of silent, prayerful meditation. Now, I just have to stop for a minute because wasn't I talking earlier about Bodhi Day and that it is 30 days of silent meditation? So again, there's that beautiful golden thread that we're going to follow this whole month of December about enlightenment and oneness and loving kindness and compassion. These all come together through these holy days. So even colors are significant. And I find this really fascinating because, when I think of December, I think of red and green for Christmas. Yet for the season of Advent, the colors are blue and purple. Because blue is the color of expectancy, of hope, of faith. And purple represents self-examination, reflection. And so when you go into a Catholic church or a Lutheran church or Episcopal church this time of year, you're not going to see the church decorated in red and green, but instead blue and purple. Now, by the 18th century, the Advent calendar and the Advent wreath were presented and developed as a teaching tool. The wreath features 4 candles that are, let's see, there are 3 purple candles. There is a pink candle, and then in the center is a white candle. And this represents the 4 qualities. And then the white candle in the middle is the Christ candle. These candles, while they represent those qualities, they also are representative of bringing light to us. This idea of enlightenment, this idea of the struggle of darkness within ourselves, and illuminating us with hope and love and joy and peace. So the question was, well, how does all of this fit into our science of mind teachings? And again, I go back to, for me, Advent is a teaching tool. It's a spiritual practice to remind us of the qualities of God, and to aid us in our own awareness and development of the Christ consciousness that resides within us, that sometimes gets blurred or gets overshadowed by the struggles that we have in our life, that get overshadowed by all the busyness of our lives. And so I want to ground us today in our spiritual teaching for today, our spiritual principle. And that is that the reality of the divine is hope, joy, love, and peace. And within this truth, we can find a life of fulfillment, a life of enlightenment. And so we are invited to walk through life with this joyous sense of expectancy of good, and realizing that underlying perfection of the divine in all life. Marcy shared a reading today from Ernest Holmes, and I want to draw out just 2 sentences out of that. I consciously receive this good and I loose it again into action, into everything I do. I know that my presence upholds and blesses everyone whom I contact, and a healing power goes from me. There is a song at the center of my being that everyone hears, a joy that everyone feels, a strength that is imparted to all. So as we move beyond the Advent calendar, the wreaths, the candles, what is Advent? It is a series of 4 Sundays, and each Sunday is given one of the virtues of the divine. Last Sunday was actually the first Sunday of Advent, and the quality was hope, joyous expectation. On Thursday, for our Pearls and Practices, we had a great discussion about hope and faith, and how there is a continuum from hope. Hope is a willingness to see the possibilities, and faith is the knowing of those possibilities. And we had a great discussion about this idea of joyous expectation. This Sunday is love. Love in so many ways: divine love, unconditional love, familial love, the love of spirit, the love, that pure love of the divine that allows us to lift ourselves up and lift others up, allows us to be in that place of hearing calls for love from people who are struggling and who are in pain. That love that helps motivate us to that place of loving kindness and compassion. Next week is a week of joy, of celebration. And the fourth Sunday is one of peace, one of harmonious relationships. The Advent for us, I believe, in Science of Mind, is a time to recommit to our faith. It is a time for us to recommit to the divine. And it's a time for us to become aware of the goodness of the divine in these four virtues that are highlighted through this Advent season. And through the birth of the child, the Christ child, we can have our awareness of the infinite perfection of God. Jesus is the birth of Jesus is a closing of the gap between humanity and the divine. Jesus is a teacher of the divine. He is a visual example on the planet of the divine. Because I think sometimes, we have a hard time grasping the concept, the fullness of God. We grew up, maybe, depending on what tradition you grew up in, or that, God was this bearded man, this grandfather, or that sat in a throne, a chair of judgment. And yet, Jesus is that example of humanity, walking among the people, teaching these qualities of the divine, and helping us to realize that, the idea of the divine, of God, is so much bigger than some stern-faced guy sitting in a throne. It's so much beyond that. So the birth of Christ helps us understand better by looking at the life of Jesus, helping us to understand the qualities of the divine, and helps us to focus on the divine within ourselves and with others. And so this Advent season is really a time to help us remember and to reconnect to those qualities of the divine, of the goodness of God that live within us, as us, and through us. For truly, we are love and joy and peace, and we are faith. We live our faith. The Advent was set up as a teaching tool also to help us work through what is known as the three levels of awareness and relationship with the divine. So as you would move through this season of Advent, you would recognize that first level of what we would call movement from understanding the law into grace. The first step is of our existence. And I think as I mention these three steps, you'll probably know them within your own life. You perhaps recognize this growth within your own spiritual journey. There's a time of no awareness, a time where we get more caught up in the physical and the mental rather than our spiritual being. That idea of the human experience and spiritual being, we're more caught up in our humanness. So that's kind of our first level of awareness. And then our second level of awareness is this awareness of good. And these are, Moses is an example of this, coming up with the laws, the framework. And we have, within Science of Mind, we have our framework for understanding spiritual freedom and the acceptance of good out of the divine. We call these the laws of abundance, reciprocity, the laws um, of goodness, of health, of well-being. And then the third level of awareness, which is where I think we are really moving towards it, that is the awareness of the Christ consciousness that lifts us up to this life of grace, this life of unconditional love. And in Christ consciousness, we live in this joyous expectancy of good. So we can be in the season of Advent all year long as we look for the good within ourselves and within everyone around us. And as we are lifted up, we use the word quite often, and certainly in Buddhism they use, we are enlightened. And we, as we are lifted up, there is a freedom from all these human entanglements that we have. Now, I know that we still have human experiences. We still have times when we struggle with the darkness. We have times where, especially now, with COVID, people are struggling with financially. Mental health issues are rampant. There are people who are struggling to stay in their homes. There's this whole idea of self-worth, of not having a job. There is concerns about how am I going to pay my rent next month? How am I going to feed my children? Yet as we can lift ourselves up with the qualities of the divine, we know that there is an expectancy of good. And we can focus our attention on the qualities of the divine and seek to cultivate those within ourselves so we can grow our faith through hope. We, as practitioners of Science of Mind, we can acknowledge the calls for love and the expressions of love within our lives. And we can allow the joy of the divine to permeate our lives, to have the awareness that there is good in our lives and focus our attention on that. We can experience the peace of mind and heart of harmonious relationships with ourselves and with others and with spirit. I can wake up in the morning saying, I am expecting something good today. I see only the good today. And just as the season of Advent within the Christian church is to make preparations, to make the way for the birth of Christ, I can make preparations in my life to receive the good. of the divine. I can prepare the way, allowing the light of the divine to help me release that which is keeping me from my good. I ask you this week, what a question that you can ask yourself is, what am I doing to prepare for a greater awareness of my good? What am I doing to prepare a greater awareness of the divine presence within me as me? What am I practicing to prepare the way for that light and those qualities of the divine to blossom and bloom within my life? So there are three things we can do. And the first thing I think is forgiveness. We can forgive ourselves for not being perfect in our relationships, within our activities. We can forgive others simply by saying, I forgive you for anything that you did, whether you knew it or not, that may have caused me harm. I forgive myself for doing anything, whether I was aware of it or not, that caused you harm. I forgive myself for any harm that I've done to myself. The second thing that we can do to help prepare our awareness is a willingness to see the good, a commitment that today I am going to see good. I am going to focus on the good that is in my life and not allow myself to get caught up in the muck and the mire of my struggles, but rather consciously say, I see the good. And the third step is to simply express joy, love, and peace everywhere that you can. Many people say, well, I don't really see anybody anymore. I don't, I can't, I'm housebound. I can't go out. But you know what? You do see people. You do communicate with people. You talk with people on the phone. Put a note in your mailbox and just tell the mailman, thank you. When you're at the grocery store, when you're at the drugstore, when you're at the hardware, express joy. Express the spirit of the season. So this week, I just want to ask you, make a commitment in the midst of all your holiday preparations, your Zoom calls, your Zoom meetings, the Christmas movies, the Christmas music that you're listening to sit in the quiet. And maybe each week, just take one word. And what does it mean to you? Ask, what does love mean to me? What does it feel like in my heart? How does it feel in my body? How does joy feel? What does joy mean to me? What brings me joy? And peace. What brings me peace? What allows me to settle into that quiet place where I can feel that connection to everyone on the planet, where I can feel that connection to the divine? What is it that I can take a deep breath and just know that my faith is strong and clear, and that I know that I am, that I am. You can ask yourself this week, how has hope, the willingness to see creative possibilities, strengthened your faith? Ask yourself, how do I express love to myself? How do I express love to others? And how can I be a presence of peace? How can I be a representation of harmonious relationships, of peace of mind, of peace of heart? And as we contemplate this for ourselves and have grow our own awareness as our light shines brighter, all the lights on the planet come together and create a strong, beautiful light of love and a light of peace. So light your own candle, fan that flame, and be the divine being that you are, full of these rich gifts of spirit. Rather than closing with a prayer today, I would like to anchor this with a reading by Charles Fillmore from the Unity tradition. I am filled with joyful expectation of new light. I am filled with joyful expectation of new inspiration. I joyfully expect to catch new insights. I joyfully expect to recognize divine direction and to have the capacity to follow through and carry out this divine direction. I am filled with joyful expectation of new life. I joyfully expect to be renewed in mind and body. I joyfully expect my faculties to be quickened. I joyfully expect to behold in my very flesh the perfection, balance, and wholeness that God has promised. I am filled with joyful expectation of new happiness in my world. I joyfully expect to act in the congenial, harmonious way that I want to act. I joyfully expect to work with and for the factors that are building a praiseworthy world. And I am filled with joyful expectation, for my trust is in the goodness of the divine. And as Ernest Holmes said, there is a song at the center of my being that everyone hears, a joy that everyone feels, and a strength that is imparted to all. I place upon everyone I meet the seamless robe of Christ, the garment of truth, which is the unity of God and humankind. I invite you to go out this week, this month, as a living Advent wreath with your own lights of love and joy and peace and faith that you are the Christ consciousness of the world. Namaste.